First, we're going to kick off with a presentation by Joe McKendrick, who's joining us this morning. Joe is an author, speaker, and really a thought leader in the data, IT, and the supply chain space as well. And so we're super thrilled to have Joe joining us this morning to talk about the role that artificial intelligence and machine learning is going to play in business in the coming years. It's going to be a great, interesting presentation. I'm looking forward to it myself, and I think it will be a good it will tee us up rather well to talk about how AI ML can play the tech suite of solutions here in the coming months as years as well. So we've got a session after this to go more into the details as it relates to DDMRP specifically. But we're going to kick it over to Joe now to kick us off and introduce the concept of AI ML to the team. So with that, I will turn it over to Joe.
Thank you. It's great to be here today as part of this very important conference. And thank you everyone for joining. And I'd also like to express my appreciation to the people at Demand-Driven Technologies for inviting me to speak with you. I'm sure you've all been hearing plenty about AI, artificial intelligence in recent years. So I'm not going to try to reinvent the wheel here in those respects. But there are certainly some major issues with AI, especially in terms of its inherent bias that need addressing. And we could actually do an entire session on that challenge alone. But for the purposes of this session, I want to delve into the ways AI is going to change the way we work, the way we think about our work, and the way we work with each other, as well as the types of opportunities it can bring to our jobs. So I'll talk about what's relevant with AI as it stands today, what it means to supply chain management, its benefits, its drawbacks, and put this all in the context of jobs, opportunities, and the skills we need to develop to succeed in the world ahead. You know, just in the news this week, a large container ship turned and kind of got stuck in the Suez Canal, jamming up hundreds of ships behind it, or attempting to traverse the canal. People complain about my driving. I wonder what happened there. But the question is, can AI help us better manage and predict supply chain disruptions? Such as this. And the answer is perhaps. So let's first talk about where we're at with AI these days. Give it a bit of a reality check, if you will. To start with this reality check, I asked Google Home the question, how widely is artificial intelligence being adopted? And her response was, sorry, I don't have any information on that. So, okay, AI can't really tell me about the state of AI just yet. But one can be forgiven for thinking that AI is all around us and about to sweep all corners of the enterprise, the world, essentially, with this great intelligence and insights. You only have to pick up an analyst report or read an industry article, which gives the appearance that the whole world is suddenly being powered by AI. And I'm probably guilty of that myself. I write a lot of articles about AI, so I'm contributing to that pool of thought as well. But let's hold that thought for a moment, okay? I imagine, for example, I imagine everybody out there is enjoying their experiences zipping around in their driverless cars, right? Or are some of you still driving yourselves? And okay, looking at your day-to-day company operations, are your goods being shipped and delivered via driverless trucks these days? So, okay, it appears we still have mainly human-driven trucks, and we're all still driving ourselves to the grocery store, at least I am. And this is probably going to be the case for some time to come. Yes, vehicles are getting much smarter, and there have been a lot of cool demonstration projects going on with driverless trucks going from coast to coast. And there are, many examples of these short-run vehicles, such as airport monorails. And boy, I miss airport monorails these days. But airport monorails, which are completely automated and driverless. But I don't think we're quite ready to hand over the keys to the machines anytime soon. When it comes to vehicles, even an automobile, people have tended to underestimate the scale of the challenge of operating a fully automated safety critical system in an unpredictable and infinitely variable environment. The slow uptake of driverless cars may be an allegory for what may be a slower than expected uptake of AI in general. After all, businesses surely operate in unpredictable and infinitely variable environments, don't they? And the past year certainly has put an exclamation point on that observation. But don't get me wrong, there are tremendous stories out there about what AI properly applied is accomplishing. In medicine and healthcare, there are some incredible applications underway for simulating drug reactions or for disease diagnosis. In finance and insurance, AI is detecting and responding to instances of fraud the moment it is happening. Or within call centers, AI is being employed to engage with customers for primary interactions. But success with AI is going to be a bumpy and uneven road, and it's going to need more human knowledge and input than we can ever imagine. I'm not just talking about data science and programming skills, but skills we all will need. The ability to identify and marshal the power of AI to the problems or opportunities where it is needed. At its core, AI isn't really a job killer. It's more of a taskmaster. It replaces tasks, but not entire job roles. The challenge for people and organizations then is to provide the knowledge and training needed to prepare for this new age. No one is more critical to AI success than the people who will be working with it every day on the front lines. Okay, let's look at the data, what the data is telling us about AI as part of our reality check. And for our purposes here, it's notable that it's still very early for AI in supply chain management. We're seeing some limited inroads, but we're still in the early stages. The latest survey just released by the American Center for Productivity and Quality, for one, shows us that 13% of executives foresee a major impact from artificial intelligence over the coming year. Another 17% predict a moderate impact. Another survey conducted a little bit earlier by Capgemini also found somewhat lukewarm response in introducing AI into supply chain management. Only 11% of executives in that survey say they had implemented advanced analytics and AI within their supply chains. Another major industry survey concurs that AI overall is still in its exploratory stages. Just 5% of a survey of 2,200 executives surveyed by MIT Sloan Management Review say they're implementing AI widely across their organization, and another 18% have implemented in a few processes, and another 19% are running pilot projects. So that's where we stand. So AI really is still cutting edge stuff here, basically. But it's important to understand its eventual ramifications on careers in our chosen field. So let's look at what's been happening. Okay, we're essentially in what you could consider a third wave of change in the supply chain intelligence revolution. Supply chain intelligence has actually been decades in the making. The first wave of change was the development and deployment of electronic data interchange, good old EDI, as a way to transmit purchase orders and specifications to partners. This was the start of a digitally networked approach to supply chain management. However, EDI was not something small to medium enterprises could viably grasp or manage on their own. They needed to depend on these larger hub companies who could afford the staff and resources to establish and maintain such networks. We saw the second wave arise in the 1990s with the rise of the internet. Here we saw greater transparency achieved as back-end inventory and logistics systems could deliver data over the web or via the internet that could be made accessible to trading partners outside the corporate walls as well as within. Now we see a third wave, that's beginning to swell offshore. It has yet to crest, but we see it out there. And that's the application of AI-based insights and actions to extend and improve supply chains. It's all about achieving highly resilient supply chain resiliency, to be able to innovate and shift as demand changes. The potential is there. A study by Bain & Company, for example, found that flexible supply networks help companies minimize the risk of disruption in times of stress. Investments in supply chain resilience can deliver a 15 to 25% improvement in plant output and a 20 to 30% rise in customer satisfaction. All good stuff. And advanced analytics, and we'll throw AI in that category, can improve supply chain forecast accuracy by 20 to 60%. So there's definitely some gains that are on the horizon. So, okay, AI is bringing a great deal of efficiencies and benefits to business supply chains. And let's talk about that side of it, the good side of AI. There are a lot of new developments that have been going on in the industry. A real-time AI-driven supply chain system, for example, can track a storm as it approaches a region. We have real-time data running predictive models in the background. As a result, administrators, managers can see in real time and correlate the impact of an approaching storm, say a hurricane or something like that, on the supply chain, on the viability and the delivery capabilities of their supply chain in the immediate future. AI ultimately will bring us enterprises more capable of sensing, responding to demand, operations, and volatile conditions. There's potential for much greater real-time responsiveness. And among those who are introducing AI into their supply chains, and remember, as a survey shows, it's still a smaller group at this point, there have been impressive results. A McKinsey survey, for example, finds 61% of executives report decreased cost, and another 53% report increased revenues as a result of AI in their supply chains. More than 1/3 report a revenue bounce exceeding 5%. Adding AI to supply chains is delivering tangible benefits for companies putting it in place. We talked about decreased costs and increased revenues, as a direct result. And again, that's all good stuff. But what's standing in the way of getting more AI into the supply chain management systems? There's part of it is a reliance on legacy technology, which create a great deal of time-consuming and error-prone manual work. Supply chain managers end up spending a great deal of their time collecting and crunching numbers from the various systems they need to interact with. Then that adds days, weeks, even months of delays to getting things done. Increasing complexity in supply chain IT infrastructure also makes it too difficult to achieve speed and agility. And these days, it's a global economy. Large companies and small companies as well depend on various sourcing, production, and distribution systems, with partners that are based all around the world. With the resiliency of AI, the focus of supply chains can shift from being reactive, folks worrying about connectivity, rigid relationships, to a more flexible, again, resilient supply chain that focuses on being proactive with higher degrees of flexibility, speed, agility, adaptability, all that good stuff. So we see today's supply chains evolving with what's a very hyper competitive economy, and there's a lot of challenges that need to be addressed, and the AI can help address. Effectively managing growing product portfolios that may include thousands of SKUs, for example, the need to provide SKUs in various dimensions, color, sizes, or whatever. And AI can help enterprises stay on top of these shifts. It takes essential, extremely scalable AI that can process terabytes or even petabytes of data. And an AI-based approach can execute data crawls across any number of internal, external systems, then aggregate and normalize that data. And here in this listing, you see just some of the areas where AI will ultimately impact supply chain management and associated disciplines. Key areas include sales and demand, especially in terms of predicting customer needs, forecasting in general for markets, and operations to help understanding unfolding trends, financial analysis, logistic network optimization, a number of areas that touch upon supply chain management responsibilities. And AI enhanced supply chains are built on end-to-end visibility of global demand and supply through collecting and processing data across multiple systems in real time. It also can serve to predict lead times through machine learning required for accurate dates and quantities. And they can monitor real-time changes of supply and demand. Okay, AI sounds great. A lot of good stuff there, right? A lot of promise. Let's see where things get a bit challenging. First and foremost, you need to keep in mind that AI doesn't have to be the answer to every problem, even within complex supply chains. There are situations where AI may be akin to trying to kill a fly with a bazooka. It simply may be too much investment for problems that may not require a sophisticated analysis. Maybe business problems can be solved with simple analysis. This is something to keep in mind. There's a temptation. AI capability is becoming increasingly democratized, becoming increasingly available to more people across the enterprise. So it may be tempting to apply these big bang theories or big bang solutions to what may be very simple problems. And as mentioned a few moments ago, we're still very early with AI, and we certainly can say that AI is experiencing growing pains. So it may be ready to move out of the labs and proofs of concept into the mainstreams of enterprises, but organizations really still need to prepare. What stands in the way then of this glorious future for AI-driven organizations? It's about data or not having the right kind of data. Most organizations are unable to deploy the AI they want and need because their data is simply not ready to support those requirements. It may be siloed. It's not properly integrated with the rest of the organization. It may be in the wrong format. So this is a challenge. The opaqueness of AI's internal processes is also an issue. So while AI is being widely adopted, much of the work is confined to specific narrow use cases versus more strategic enterprise-centric adoption. Popular use cases in these initial stages of AI include improving logistics functions, reducing inventory, increasing inventory turns, increasing overall equipment effectiveness, very specific use cases, and moving this and connecting this with the rest of the enterprise so you have an enterprise approach is a challenge, not only because the technology problems are hard, but because it's all about change management. And change management, you think technology is hard, change management is really hard. And part of the challenge is finding business requirements that can be satisfied through the use of AI. In other words, we have a solution, where's the problem? Many of the emerging technologies around AI are fascinating, but it's still unclear how businesses can capitalize on these technologies. There's another survey out there by MIT Sloan that outlines the work ahead to move AI deeper into the enterprise. And we need to get our enterprises to re-architect their foundational technology capabilities, be it infrastructure, cybersecurity, data management. Again, data is very important, as well as the software development processes. And AI requires a lot of these processes be re-engineered or rethought, along with formal governance efforts, formal governance processes applied. So there's plenty of work that needs to be done for AI to really make a difference. And, they say a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And that certainly applies to supply chains. I was speaking with an analyst just a few months ago, in fact, and they mentioned that a lot of the supply chain transactions that they're working with, that they're seeing, are still taking place via paper. And paper is still being exchanged and generated. A lot of companies are still relying on good old EDI as well, which still takes time to set up and get moving with partners. So I'm assuming that many of you tuned in today have fairly robust internal systems. You may have the technology that accepts streaming data to move forward. However, there may be smaller companies out there, be it your partners or you may be with such a company that still relies on, older or legacy methods, you might say, if not paper, then still EDI or exchanging information via email or spreadsheets. And, that's all got to be upgraded and modernized in order to support a well-functioning AI type of approach. So AI requires an increased focus on risk management as well, risk management ethics. I mentioned that briefly in the beginning, and that's a subject for an entire session, the ethics and inherent bias that we need to remove from AI. So we're just beginning to grasp what is needed in terms of policies and processes and procedures to manage these things, to manage the ethical, legal, and reputational, as well as financial risk that are associated with AI. And one area which I don't think gets enough attention as well is the trust factor. That is, how much trust can executives or decision makers put in the output that AI systems are providing? Trust is the glue that holds enterprises and processes together. And lately, more of that trust is being relegated to AI, across many venues. When we buy a book online, for example, we're trusting AI recommendations for the books related to the ones we have purchased. We're learning, I mentioned driverless cars or AI enhanced cars and trucks and vehicles, and we're learning to trust AI more and more to guide our trucks and cars, to guide these vehicles. They can apply warnings, they can apply brakes in hairy traffic situations. Call center staff these days, trust AI generated recommendations to upsell customers they have on the line. We let AI move more valuable customers to the head of the line in queues, reservation systems, for example. But we need to understand, AI again is kind of opaque, and we need to understand how trustworthy it is. Maybe more, maybe less trustworthy than we perceive it to be. It depends on the situation. In terms of corporate decision making, at least 1 in 4 executives responding to a Forbes survey report they had to manually intervene to override an AI generated decision. Still, while most are happy with the results of their AI efforts in this survey, and they intend to keep moving forward, they see the need for oversight of the output that AI is providing. Close to 3/4 recognize that close oversight of AI is essential. Another study published in the Harvard Business Review, confirmed that people embrace AI's recommendations as long as AI works in partnership with humans. For instance, in one experiment, the researchers in this study framed AI as augmented intelligence. And I think that's a great word for AI, augmented intelligence. That enhances and supports human recommenders rather than replacing them. The AI human hybrid recommender fared as well as the human only recommender. So leveraging the best of both worlds may be the optimum approach for building trustworthy AI. That's the key. And we need to set our expectations appropriately about AI. It's not a magical force that will lift businesses to new heights of profitability, not by itself. It needs to be trustworthy to both corporate decision makers and their customers, and for all intents and purposes, consider this a work in progress. Along those lines as well, it's important to remember that AI is fallible. It's not magical. It's not all seeing. It's extremely fallible. If we think an AI enhanced supply chain is incredibly super intelligent, remember the lessons of 1 year ago, March 2020. An analysis published in MIT Technology Review points out that AI got just as befuddled by the sudden shifts resulting from the onset of the COVID crisis than human planners were. AI models trained with data were rapidly outdated. It was a day-to-day thing. In fact, it appears humans had to jump in to course correct many supply chain systems that were going awry when the COVID crisis hit in a big way last year. So the lessons learned from COVID are that purchasing intentions can change overnight, and many supply chain systems, simply can't keep up with such rapid shifts. Even the most intelligent companies with the most sophisticated AI needs that real-time data to constantly be fed in there to keep on top of these overnight shifts. And very important, keep the human in the process, human engagement. And as was pointed out in the MIT analysis, machine learning models are designed to respond to changes, but most are also fragile, that perform badly when input data differs too much from the data they were trained on. It's a mistake to assume you can set up an AI system and walk away. Now, keep in mind, it doesn't take a global mega event such as a pandemic or a trade war to really mess things up. You can have a container ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal, right? Or you may have a really mundane, down in the weeds software glitch that can also wreak havoc with supply chains. There's all kinds of factors that will keep shifting what you need to see, what you need to know, what's going on out there. Again, it's not a huge event that can take down a supply chain. Part of this challenge is that AI requires large volumes of data. It needs to be the right data. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be fresh and updated. And it often takes hundreds of thousands of data points. The petabytes of data, sometimes terabytes at least, to accomplish basic tasks, such as detecting pictures. That's a big thing with AI these days, detecting pictures or understanding what's seen in photos. That it takes thousands of data points. And this data must constantly be cleaned and prepared in a specific format to teach AI algorithms. Building and maintain a continuous high volume of quality labeled data can be quite resource intensive. Job uncertainty, that's something that you hear a lot about with AI. And it's potentially actually the people in the middle who may be squeezed by AI, the people doing the intensely manual tasks, healthcare workers and laborers may not be able to, probably will not be replaced by AI. The people on the other end, people with the creative energy, entrepreneurial roles who are kind of leading the charge with things, AI probably can't replace their roles, but it's managers who maybe see their roles diminish with the onset of AI. And this was seen in a study out of the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. Because as AI expands within a business, the managers that are there can oversee a wider breadth of operations. You don't need as many middle managers. And the most surprising revelation from the study was that AI, robotics were included, boosts employment within both low-skilled and high-skilled jobs, but it's the middle-skilled jobs that are threatened. AI cannot substitute low-skilled workers such as pickers and packers, nor can AI substitute the people designing the processes or steering the course of their businesses. So we need we need to ensure that people's jobs are elevated. People's jobs are there's creativity and entrepreneurship built into more jobs. So I might add as well, in many cases these days, it's difficult, and I'm sure many of you in the audience have encountered that, it's difficult to see real-time information in the supply chain. And I once heard one executive put it, why can't we see supply chain information the same way we see the information about our upcoming Uber ride? We know where the car is, we know what time it's going to arrive, we know what the cost will be. Of course, supply chains are much more complicated than Uber rides. They're more complicated than ever. And add to that a great deal of volatility out in the world. The COVID crisis was a huge, probably the hugest example ever of how supply chains can be disrupted. And there's also weather events, plenty of weather events always going on, unexpected spikes in demand for one reason or another. Economic conditions, economic slowdowns, political unrest may hamper things, and software glitches. So we need that additional insights into our supply chains, and AI. It's difficult getting AI to that point. So AI is real. It's here. It's coming. But successfully putting AI into action is exactly a walk in the park, as I was saying. It requires a fundamental, it requires data, and it requires a fundamental rethinking of the business. AI simply won't succeed in a vacuum. You can't just plug in AI and boom, your business is suddenly soaring with profitability. AI succeeds because it succeeds because of people working together, and with the systems and machines they can develop and train. And one of the most important developments in recent years is the democratization and simplification of technology, making technology available across the enterprise to everybody, making analytic power available to everyone, and by extension, making AI, the power of AI, available to everyone. When teams of people collaborate with each other and with their systems and have access to the latest powerful technology, they can really deliver far superior results. And AI will soon be everyone's job and everyone's opportunity. It's not just the technical folks who are going to have the fun. It's not the technical, the developers and the data scientists who can benefit from building their AI skills portfolios. The opportunities will come from across the employment spectrum, and career growth will be promising for those who can apply a deep working knowledge of AI with business skills. And here we see some of the roles that are essential to deliver successful AI to enterprises. Note that, we have technologies listed here, and that can mean anything from data engineer to cloud engineer, data scientist to software developer. But that's only one part of the AI team. And we emphasize here team. It's a teamwork. And I like the way that Vijay Sankar described the roles associated with AI success. He said, it's not enough that you know machine learning. You also need to know the process. How quote to cash works in any ERP is not something you can teach a data scientist in 2 days. It's also tough to teach machine learning to an ERP specialist in a couple of days or weeks. It's important that we cross-pollinate knowledge. Very important, cross-pollinate knowledge from across the enterprise. Sure, the AI is created in the data center or the development lab, but it's the downstream business functions which will have to embrace AI, machine learning elements in their processes. This includes skills such as annotation, labeling, itemizing every step of the decision-making process so that they are machine learning ready. And the next generation of jobs will need to focus on taking subject matter experience and translating that into machine learnable labels and annotations. So there will be a need for people to engage in this work. A potential job role for those highly skilled subject matter experts, such as AI instructors or AI trainers who train complex machine learning systems, will be a necessity. And that's just an example of one area where we'll see a lot of growth and opportunity. I talked about change management, the challenge of change management a little bit earlier. And the rise of AI is bringing about change management for every role. For example, with supply chain management departments, as they embrace more AI, we'll see many of the mundane, low complexity tasks get automated away, through this algorithmic decision making. And this allows supply chain managers to elevate the roles, to focus more on the business, to focus more on more complex tasks. And we see that happening in every department. Every function across the business. So preparing for greater AI adoption will require professionals to fundamentally understand where those technologies excel and where the human element, the judgment, perspective, problem solving, sense of innovation comes in. Okay, so let's map out our impending AI journey. For starters, let's look again at Amazon, which sits on the top of many supply chains. A couple of years back, they announced they intend to train 100,000 workers with AI skills. Now, if AI and associated robotics do such great jobs replacing human labor, why is Amazon even bothering then? Why bother with a huge training program that's costing them more than $700 million if they're not going to need people? Everything's going to be automated. Because the fact is they're going to need more people. Their volumes keep going up. Their business keeps increasing. And they need more and more people to oversee the systems, the devices, the analytics to handle this increased business. So there's a paradox here, right? We have a paradox. We don't have enough people to manage the AI, to build and manage the AI that we're designing to reduce human labor. So think about the irony. There isn't enough labor to handle all the labor-saving technology we're implementing. So it's important to have the right combination of skills and competency. It's never just a technology challenge. AI is technology for sure, but the challenge goes way beyond the technology aspect. When we're looking at successful enterprise AI implementations, they need to be aligned to business goals, and enterprises need to invest in current employees, in their current employees, to upskill and train them. Do what Amazon's doing and get that training out there, get that awareness out there. Emphasize that teamwork, team building skills, teamwork. Another important element is internal collaboration. Having the processes in place to bring business leaders, managers, technologists, the data scientists, we'll include them, together to identify where there are opportunities to work as one. And most executives I've seen in surveys appear to be optimistic that AI isn't really replacing jobs as everybody fears. I saw in a recent survey, 77% say they're confident that their employees could be trained in new job roles, that the new roles that AI is creating. And part of the ability to embrace and advance your career prospects with AI is the ability to reimagine your business's processes. This is very key. As with all tasks, the work itself needs to be redesigned. We need to leverage human talent to its max, perhaps through retraining, perhaps through entrepreneurship, and definitely through collaboration. AI cannot do most of what we can do. People need to redesign and re-leverage work processes so they can leverage AI capabilities. And we need more creative and visionary thinking when it comes to introducing AI into our businesses, into the workflow. And intelligent AI-driven supply chain requires a data supply chain. This is the other key aspect. I talked about data and then the challenge of bringing in data. To succeed with AI, you need to understand the power and value of data. You may have a lot of older technology, silos that don't lend themselves to feeding data into any AI-based networks that are developing. So this is where strategies such as data virtualization come into play. Create an accessible service layer of data that's available across the enterprise. It can tap into your systems of record, your ERP systems, your supply chain management systems, your financial systems, and it can be virtualized. It's basically real time. It's a real time fabric, and augment it with things like streaming analytics. This is the essence of democratizing and simplifying data across your enterprise. And again, AI, augmented intelligence. That's the way to describe it. Augmented intelligence. It's as once blended with human input, will bring about a deeper focus on innately human skills. Again, that critical thinking, that emotional intelligence, that value judgment, that sense of innovation, that sense of what needs to be done next. So how do we attain this? It's all about sensing, responding to change with collaboration and communication, training, education. It's important to encourage and facilitate more effective flow around sharing of information in real time across these networks of employers, partners, and suppliers that we have. Training and education. We need to empower ourselves. We need to empower our employees. We need to empower our manager, our own bosses be able to react to the insights generated by AI, and create the ability, this supply chain resiliency that'll help us navigate smoothly, when things are disrupted, and disruption is an inevitability. Again, keep an eye on that ship in the Suez. So to conclude, AI is a disruptive force. It's still out there on the horizon. It's still incoming, and it's going to ultimately open up new opportunities for forward-thinking executives and their enterprises to adopt new ways of thinking, new ways to better meet the needs of customers, more rapidly and assuredly. AI augments human skills to make people better at their work, as well as to free managers, to free you up for higher value work within your enterprise. So, okay, with that, again, thank you very much. And we're going to open up the floor to your questions.
All right. Thank you, Joe. That was very interesting, very exciting. Thanks for sharing with us. Brilliant. Well, we've got a couple questions that are already out there, and then I got a couple that were messaged to me as well. So let's walk through them, and you can kind of hopefully answer these to the best of our abilities. So Andre says, one of the stumbling blocks in AI adoption is that most texts are written by folks, though well-meaning, have scant business experience, whereas most people in business have scant knowledge in advanced stats and applied math. The gulf may increase in size. Have you found the same thing in your experience? This is a good question, because I definitely see this with AI/ML.
Yeah, definitely a great question. And I'm not too optimistic about folks being more widespread adoption of statistical knowledge and math skills. That's a problem that goes back to our educational system, and it's gonna take some time until people, if ever. I'm not optimistic that statistics is going to become a mainstay in people's experience. What will happen, and what I've seen in the IT world, for example, looking back over the IT world, computing has become quite ubiquitous because it's become simple, easy, and running in the background. Not everybody is qualified to become a programmer or a developer, and it's not required anymore. You don't have to be a programmer to sit down and work with very sophisticated systems. And I think that's the direction we're seeing with AI and machine learning as well. You're not going to have to be a data scientist to be able to work with AI. It's going to be built in the background. It's going to be pervasive or persistently running in the backgrounds of systems. We're going to see more and more of that. You see that in call centers, for example. Call center reps are great at what they do, working with customers, but they're not data scientists, they're not programmers, they're not developers. They have these intuitive systems, these intuitive dashboards that come up as they deal with as they deal with customers, and guides them. It runs in the background. And the challenge, of course, I say this, and the challenge becomes the opaqueness of AI systems, and that's a big challenge now. That's what people are worrying about now, the opaqueness. These AI systems are delivering biased responses. That's been shown in studies. There's a bias against minorities, for example, in a lot of AI output, and that has to be rectified. We need these systems running in the background where we don't have to worry about them, but we also need a way to oversee the results they're delivering and to oversee how those results are being managed and delivered. That's the challenge going forward.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you. I mean, just like any software, right? You have to take the users along, right? The users have to be able to analyze, administrate the functions that are going on, even if they don't fully need to understand the actual math and statistics behind it. And I think it has to be that way, or else it can't succeed.
Exactly right.
Great. All right. Second question from Andre. So the path for AI/ML is that I hope it plays out like forecasting. After a number of decades, forecasts work well for a handful of algorithms. Do you think AI/ML will follow the same path where say cluster analysis, k-mean, Bayesian reasoning, and multiple regression will become the mainstay in 10 years?
I think so. I think that forms the foundation of machine learning and AI in general. Again, it's not. I don't know about being a mainstay in terms of being visible that people will be working with. Again, it'll be running behind the scenes. These processes, these ways of arriving at likely outcomes that AI systems use will be running behind the scenes. They'll be kind of built into the programs we use on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, the typical manager doesn't need to understand Bayesian reasoning to you know, even though it's good to know how decisions are arrived at you know, through machine learning rather, but
yeah,
they're not going to have to be experts at it.
Great. All right, Joyce had a question. What was the building pictured in the photo credited to you?
Okay, that building is on this. It's in the midst of a place called the Hannover Messe. It's where CeBIT, the big European IT trade show. Unfortunately, I'm not sure. I don't think it's held anymore. But every spring in Hanover, Germany, at the Messe, these fairgrounds, the big CeBIT show was held, and I had the privilege to attend that a few times. That building is on display in the middle of the fairgrounds. You know, kind of, I guess they're trying to make some kind of architectural statement with that. You know, it's some very futuristic buildings right there in the middle, and you know, there's this lopsided. You know, I guess it's some kind of building of the future.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I got sent this question. So let's see. Supply chain planners and users take great pride in having developed the expertise to overcome current planning system limitations. What can be done to ensure users accept the benefits that AI can bring to their job?
Well, that's a great question. I imagine when we're talking about users, we're talking about people in the that work with the supply chain managers in that department.
Exactly.
Or
I think people who have the job today, I mean, they've got all these ways and means and spreadsheets and models to kind of tackle the business challenges they have. Let's say AI comes in and provides a lot of benefit from them. All of that kind of goes away. So how do you bring the user along? How do you get, the change to be enacted in the proper way for businesses?
I think if we could show the user that, hey, we can take these, if someone sat down and measured how much time they spend on a specific task through the day, they're probably going to find they spend a lot of time on, sitting down, doing mundane manual stuff, maybe inputting data, maybe working with spreadsheets. They probably spend a good chunk of their week just kind of heads down and mired in reports, delivering reports or creating reports, again, spreadsheets. If you're involved in EDI still, you're probably concerned with the meeting the specifications and standards and protocols, and making sure your partners, supply chain partners, also meet those same specifications. If AI systems can come in and kind of take away those mundane heads down tasks and make your job more interesting, it gives you more time to really think about ways to improve your operation, think about ways to communicate with your employees, to communicate with your bosses, to kind of go forward with new ideas. I think that's a great sell right there. AI makes your job much more interesting.
Yeah.
It automates away that boring number crunching detail stuff.
It does, yeah. And I think with any great software implementation, AI or not, anytime you're providing value to an end user via technology, it changes the role a bit. But I think in supply chain specifically, I see it freeing up people to do more value add activity. Many people, especially in supply chain now, are so inundated with just mashing together supply and demand and spreadsheets, right? And they can't really, these are really highly analytical, very, very smart individuals. And so it frees them up to add value in other ways, which I think is a really exciting benefit for AI/ML as well.
Absolutely. I imagine, this week, looking at the news, I'm wondering how many people have their corporate people coming to them saying, hey, what's with the ship in the Suez? Is that going to affect our deliveries? Is that going to affect the way we, and it is, I've been I just read in the news this morning, some analysts say it's going to really hold up and throw a wrench into supply chains, and things are really tight now because we're just coming out of COVID. Hopefully we're coming out of it, and the economy is picking up again, and supply chains are really stretched thin across the globe. And I imagine, again, the folks out there probably have their bosses saying to them, "What's with this ship? What's with this container ship that's sideways in the Suez, and how's that going to affect us?" And with some analytic work, maybe enhanced by AI someday, but some analytic work, we can get a sense of what's being affected. Will the shipments we have coming from a factory in India or China be slowed because of ships now sitting in the Red Sea?
Right. All right, last question here, because I want to give everybody time to switch over to the next sessions here at the top of the hour. This is a question for me. How long do you think it will take for AI ML to be really adopted across supply chains globally? I mean, when do I look around and see every supply chain in the global ecosystem adopting some kind of AI ML strategy related to their IT operations?
Oh, wow. Well, some kind of AI strategy. That's happening now. So you saw in the surveys I mentioned, it's probably 11, 12, 13% have some kind of AI activity going on within the supply chain. Again, it might be this more focused stuff, inventory turns, things like that, applying AI to specific functions. And we're going to see more and more of that. Where it reaches critical mass, it's not there yet with critical mass in the supply chain operation. Give it a decade, but I wouldn't be surprised if we talk 10 years from now when we still hear about people using spreadsheets and paperwork and things like that. So it's going to take time, like everything. I just heard that there's a lot of PCs out there still running Windows XP, which was launched back in 2001. So it takes time.
Yeah, well, certainly, if there's one thing for sure, it's that Excel will always have a home for supply chain planners. That's absolutely certain.
Yeah, exactly. And the key is, with AI, anything with AI it's not about the technology. It's, you don't plop AI into an operation or on top of your company and expect miracles. It's people. It's people with innovation, entrepreneurial thinking that moves things forward. And AI is a tool, just like any form of IT, any form of technology is a tool that get things going, to support your operation, to support your ideas.
That's brilliant.
It takes people. It's always people.